Mckinney. Welcome to Joey's Legacy Roundtable. I'd like to welcome our guest this evening, which is Althea. She's attorney at law, Dr. Robin Cannizzaro, and of course, our esteemed guest, Scott Fine.
Hello, everyone. How are you? How's everyone?
Very good, thank you.
Good.
Great.
Hello.
Hello. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Joey's Legacy.
Let's start with a question for each guest, and then by then we should have some more questions that come in.
Okay. We've got one for Dr. Robin. And this is, Joey's Legacy sees a lot of cases where veterinary records are either incomplete or have been altered. In fact, vet boards will dismiss a more serious complaint, like practice below the standard of care, but will almost always charge a veterinarian with failure to keep accurate records. As one of Joey's Legacy's veterinarians, you have likely seen this as well. I'm sure your primary focus is whatever is written in the records that you're reviewing, but can the members' comments to you ever carry any weight in your decision as to whether or not malpractice occurred?
It certainly is helpful to fill in the gaps, but as far as any kind of legal standing, I'm really tied to what is in the medical records, however complete or incomplete they are. And that's unfortunate, but they're legal documented records, which every person should know that they have a right to a copy of their records, and that includes all the records. And I'd like to add a helpful hint to your listeners too, that if your pet has been hospitalized, please make sure that you get what I call the treatment sheet part of the records as well. What that is when your pet is hospitalized, there is a treatment sheet that goes along with it that monitors all of their vital signs and things like that. Sometimes that is going to fill in information that is missing in the actual medical records. That is part of the medical records. But there could be missing information that corroborates what it is that you are trying to communicate. So if the pet has been a certain way overnight and then was discharged, and it conflicts with what the actual records say and not the treatment sheets, then there's a direct conflict there. And that can really help corroborate what the pet parent is trying to say. So ultimately, I have to rely on the records, and it isn't in any way, and I want your listeners to know this, that we as veterinarians don't believe you. As a veterinarian looking at another veterinarian's record, that is a legal document, and that is something that we have to follow, even if it's incomplete or unfortunately if it has been altered. And we do our best to try to see if there's any evidence in any way that it appears as if there's any alterations. And I am willing, if there's enough information in the case, to write in my letter that there is conflicting information about what the pet parent experienced when they picked their pet up versus what is documented in the record. If there is enough information in the records to suggest or indicate that that is a likely, probability, but know that your case is going to be stronger if what's documented in the records corroborates what it is that the pet parent has to say about what happened.
Dr. Cannizzaro, I have a question as a follow-up. I try to encourage everyone that I refer to, our veterinarians, to review the records to the extent they're able when they receive them from the veterinarian before they send them to you and the other vets. Clearly, if they can catch something which is inaccurate, incomplete, it would behoove them to go back to the veterinarian and see if that can be corrected. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's highly unlikely a veterinarian is going to make a correction. I certainly would encourage anybody to try in any way that you can, get clarity, in what is in the records. That's always beneficial. Be aware also that another tool for a case that I did look at was one of the early cases I looked at. The pet parent actually had video documentation of her pet and how her furry loved one was walking and not walking, etc. And that didn't align necessarily with exactly what the records said. That's really helpful too, because it's pretty hard to dispute video evidence unless, of course, there's no way to verify that video was taken in proximity with what was going on with the records, which I think in most cases, I certainly feel pretty confident it is, but I think there's ways of determining that, and our attorney could probably speak more to that. It's always fine to ask for that. I know rare cases, maybe ever, that a veterinarian is actually going to change their record or clarify that, especially if they're on the defensive and they're feeling as if, they may be, that the pet parent is going to go after them. Then it becomes very difficult, because communication, if it was poor before, really becomes a big breakdown. And I understand why. I mean, it's perfectly understandable. And if you're ever represented by an attorney, then that attorneys are going to tell you to be careful and, don't speak to the pet parent. And basically that's what we're told by, our attorneys, should something start to break down and go south and go ugly. It's a shame. We need to find a better way that we can have better communication across the board with pet parents, veterinarians, and then maybe we won't end up in these difficult places. Because the sad fact is, a lot of these cases, either because the records are incomplete or because there really isn't any negligence, sometimes bad things happen. And one of the things that I want to say, which will be outside of what maybe some of the other veterinarians say, is that allopathic or traditional medicine has a lot of bad stuff that happens. And it's not necessarily because veterinarians are practicing bad medicine. The medicine in human and veterinary medicine that is traditional or allopathic medicine is inherently flawed, and unfortunately causes a lot of diseases and a lot of bad things. And those are consequences of using those forms of treatment, sadly. So, and those don't rise to malpractice. It's a side effect or consequence of the drugs used in some cases. I mean, unless there's a gross negligence, like I think there was one particular case where, 9 times the dosage of medication was given or something like that. I mean, it's different, because then you're talking about a truly incompetent situation. I don't know if that answered your question. I hope
It does. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question for you, Althea. You were instrumental in a case in California involving a Cocker Spaniel where emotional damages were awarded. It's not common that emotional damages are awarded. Can you tell us a little about that?
So in terms of awarding emotional distress damages for the loss of the companion animal, it is becoming more common. And it just may be in, be the different circumstances, or the attorneys that you're talking to may not have experienced that, because the area of animal law is growing, but it's still not a major area in the practice of law. I mean, if it were, you would see animal attorneys like you would see personal injury attorneys and estate planning attorneys. But that case that I worked on was approximately 20 years ago, and the area of animal law has been growing since, Animal Legal Defense Fund was started in the 70s. And so animal advocates, attorneys have been working towards achieving little goals gradually. And one of those goals is to take on cases that may be able to create some kind of record or sometimes precedent in terms of the decisions that are rendered. And then those can be used as persuasive authority by other attorneys as they proceed with similar cases. So the case that I handled for the Cocker Spaniel named Daisy was a case where my client had Daisy, a Cocker Spaniel. This Daisy was her family. She had other family loss a family member passed away, and so Daisy came into her life, and she took Daisy everywhere she went. She took Daisy to work, she took Daisy to car rides, and Daisy was her family member. When she got Daisy as a young dog, there were pictures, Daisy's first bath, Daisy's first birthday, Daisy's first Halloween, and these are things like someone would do with their child. So I know, you know, people who have children, you have like, you know, baby's first haircut, baby's first bath, and you take pictures and you commemorate those events. And so that's what my client had done with her dog, Daisy. And the significance of that is that is, you know, that relationship really shows that there's an emotional connection and bond there. And in order to proceed with gaining emotional distress damages, part of the argument is to show that there was a connection here, that this dog was like family. This dog was more than just what the law considers animals as like a piece of property. So to go about, when you take these cases on from the beginning, you have to look at factors that indicate that there was a special relationship here, because it's very different to when I was on the panel, when the ALDF, Animal Legal Defense Fund, used to have a panel for people to call. Like sometimes people would, you know, this is an example, like they would have a dog, but the dog was tied up in the yard, and now they want emotional distress damages for their dog, that they had never had an emotional relationship with their dog. And, you know, tying your dog up in the yard is not good care for the dog and not something people should do. I'm sure I'll agree with that here. So this relationship was significant. And then the other thing we look at is what exactly happened to that animal. And was that something that is really emotionally upsetting? And so what happened to my client's dog is she had had an arrangement with this company that they would come to San Francisco, and they had a fancy van, and they would pick up animals, and they targeted people who, you know, were on the higher income scale, who had money to spend on their pets because they considered pets to be their family. And then they would take them to, it was called a bed and breakfast for pets in Napa and wine country, and then have this there. And so basically what happened is that something happened to my client's dog, Daisy, while she was in the care of these people, and came back with severe injuries. And so the injuries were very, very severe. And so that's where having the vet records and a necropsy showing exactly what the damage was, because they never said the dog had been injured. And so it took the vets kind of a while to figure out what was going on with the dog. And so those were some of the things we looked at. They were very severe injuries that someone should have disclosed. And because they weren't disclosed, that made the treatment plan all that more difficult, because the vet didn't know what was going on with the dog when the dog came in. But part of why that case got the attention it did was because of the pictures and the images and everything that the relationship between Daisy and my client had. And that was something significant. And there are arguments that can be made from a legal standpoint where you can get more than an animal's property value. And they come from other areas of the law, that you can take the arguments and use them. And I will say, you know, that was why that case is partially the client, the pictures, the images, the demonstration of that relationship really showed there was an emotional issue. And it was not an easy case to handle, but in the end, that was the award that my client received was designated as emotional distress damages for the loss of her dog, Daisy. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's fine.
That's what happens when you ask lawyers questions.
That's fine. Dr. Cannizzaro, I have a question that was posed to the group. And I think this might be something you could address appropriately. The companion animal in this case is a cat. My baby girl was, bear with me, was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and a heart murmur just more than a week ago. I will still schedule her for an echocardiogram to check her heart. My vet prescribed her a medication, methimazole. Does that sound right?
Methimazole, yeah,
Methimazole,
right,
okay.
yeah.
5 milligrams for 3 weeks to take for hyperthyroidism. Her T4 level is 13, which is above the normal range of 0.8 to 4. I asked my vet if this is safe. He only answered me that sometimes liver levels might go above normal when checked for blood work. My concern with this prescription drug is the negative reviews and side effects on the pet. I am really concerned for my baby's health and doubting if I will give her the doses for 3 weeks. Can you offer any advice?
Well, one of the things that I want to say up front is that, of course, I can't give medical advice without having a client-patient relationship.
Right.
And that's just a standard in the industry. What I will say is that there's no drug that's 100% safe. And there are definitely negative side effects to that drug, methimazole. There are alternatives to that drug that could be used. I don't know if your veterinarian discussed those with you. One of the things that stands out to me, and I don't want to make any assumptions here, it would be incredibly important to make sure that your cat has had a full blood workup. Obviously, there's been some blood workup because they're aware of the elevated T4. A free T4 should be done, full chemistry profile, and a complete blood count at a minimum, and a urinalysis. I will say, as a homeopathic veterinarian, that the majority of hyperthyroid cats at the foundation actually have kidney disease. So there's an intimate relationship between kidney disease and hyperthyroidism. So if your cat doesn't have elevated kidney enzymes at this time, that'll come later down the pipe. Your choices of treatment are radioactive iodine, which is unpleasant because your cat will be taken from you for a little while for the radioactive treatment. And of course, you have to be careful because your cat will come home radioactive. And so handling the eliminations and things of that sort, you have to be incredibly careful. There's surgery, but that's tricky because there are sometimes what's called ectopic thyroid tissue, which is extra thyroid tissue that's not exactly where the thyroid sits. So you can remove the thyroid glands and they can survive without them, believe it or not, and then still have active thyroid tissue left behind. The radioactive thyroid injections will obliterate all the thyroid tissue. So that is averted. And then lastly, which I think is superior, of course, is homeopathic treatment for hyperthyroidism or anything that ails a pet. There is no side effects to that, whereas there is for surgery, radiation, and methimazole treatment. There are no side effects, and you can go to the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy to try to find a homeopathic veterinarian near you. You can just go on the web and look, perhaps that does phone consultations, but still need a local veterinarian to work closely with you to monitor blood work and physical exams, body weight, etc. But there's a lot of natural things that can be very, very helpful. And the other thing is, even if methimazole needs to be used, if you were going forth with a homeopathic protocol, we might be able to get to the lowest possible dose of methimazole, because eventually you're going to go higher and higher, and eventually your cat may have some negative side effects like vomiting, diarrhea, elevated liver enzymes. And do know that elevated liver enzymes can also be an effect of hyperthyroidism, because that is an overactive thyroid hypermetabolizing. So that's why your cat loses weight, and we can wear out all the organs in the late stages of hyperthyroidism. And I'm speaking in generalities here, so I'm hoping that the majority of individuals can follow me. So it's better to treat early than late, and you have alternatives. You don't have to settle on methimazole. You can consider the other alternatives. I'd encourage you to do natural treatment if you feel so inclined, and go to the website I mentioned, the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy. But you're right, there's bad side effects. Some cats will suffer more than others. It just depends, just like people. Some people tolerate bad drugs better than others. And it's just kind of a crapshoot. We don't know. And at what point, even if your cat does tolerate the medication, at what point might your cat start having problems or side effects of the medication? And just to be clear, side effects is a very polite word that we use that actually translates to the disease the drug causes itself. So you have the original underlying imbalance of the disease that your cat has, and we layer upon that the drug disease itself. And that's why things get very complicated with drug treatment in 99.999% of cases that are treated with drugs. So I hope that is helpful to this pet parent.
Thank you, Dr. Cannizzaro. Appreciate that.
Althea, I hear there are plans to create an educational model for law school students and attorneys about veterinary malpractice. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that was an idea that Scott and I talked about, and I don't know if Scott, you wanted to add about that, or?
I'm going to let you take the lead on this.
Okay.
You made the initial contacts and got the okays and stuff. So yeah.
Okay, so yes, one of the things that I hope to be working on with Joey's Legacy is to create an education program for attorneys and paralegals. And in conversations with Scott over different times, some of the concerns about attorneys came to light about not understanding that animals have more than their property value, and that there are many cases that have awarded damages based on something other than the animal's property value. And it made me think that maybe a really good education program would be something that would be beneficial for many attorneys, because I know a lot of attorneys who would like to get more involved in helping animals and helping animal guardians with these issues. And the best way to do that is to create an education program on, for example, to even the attorneys that are already part of Joey's Legacy, but how to handle a veterinary malpractice claim. And we do these kinds of education programs in other areas of the law. So, you know, when you're, I don't know, if you're just become an attorney or you're switching to a new area, there are a number of different courses, like, you know, how to handle a personal injury case, how to create a trust. So there are education programs that both new attorneys and experienced attorneys can take to learn more about a particular area of law. And I've already spoken with the college where I teach, because I teach animal law. And I've spoken with one of the local bar associations who would be interested in sponsoring. And we could award continuing education credit, because I know in California, and I'm sure in most other states, attorneys have to do so many hours of continuing education each year or each cycle to renew their license. And so attorneys always need that specific training. And many times there isn't a lot of information or resources out there. So if we could provide something, we could not only educate the attorneys that are currently part of Joey's Legacy, but we could also educate newer attorneys who are out of law school who want to engage in practice of animal law, and experienced attorneys who would like to get more involved, and this is something they could do. And I think certainly targeting attorneys who have been plaintiffs' trial lawyers would be an excellent way to go, because the veterinary malpractice cases versus medical malpractice or other kinds of personal injury cases, there's many similarities. And I think that would be a good pool to reach out to, because it's not, you don't have to totally relearn concepts and things like that. They're very similar areas, so someone could just transition fairly easily. But I think even if someone has worked in another area of law, with the education programs, that we could put together the education course, which would include, you know, speakers, practicing attorneys who are handling the cases, veterinarians to talk about the process and everything, to give people a broad overview of what's needed and how to handle these cases, would greatly expand the attorney network. and help people who want to, have, justice, accountability, someone take responsibility for what happened.
So you mentioned, Althea, you mentioned the law college that you teach at gave us a thumbs up on this idea, right?
Yes, so I talked to the person at the Bar Association, the San Mateo County Bar Association, and they are very interested in sponsoring this educational program.
Wonderful.
The college where I teach, so I teach animal law. And so just to give a little background on that, I teach at a community college, and animal law is one of the courses. So this course is offered through the paralegal program at Cannizzaro College, which is in Redwood City, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Community college, California, is open to anyone. So anyone can sign up for the class. There is no prerequisite. So part of my goal in creating that curriculum that's offered at a community college is so that animal law can be made available to everyone. Anyone who is interested in animal law should be able to take a course in animal law. We are the first paralegal program to offer this course, and to my knowledge, the first community college to offer animal law. Normally, animal law is a class only available in a law school. So, and not every law school offers it. So part of the reason to educate more attorneys is to make this easily available, where these concepts of animal law and different aspects of animal law, what an animal's worth is, that kind of thing, is available to everyone. And so, just so you know, if you wanted to take animal law to law school, you couldn't. You have to enroll in law school, and that's to get, an undergraduate degree or certain test scores and things like that. And then you pay a lot of money. But at community college, I think it's like $150 for the course with all of the fees and everything else. And so, but we have people who are ready to support this, who have the CLE, the continuing education certification. So if we put this training together, we could do it by Zoom so that we can include as many people as possible, and even possibly do it with one of the national associations that offers continuing education credit, and they have filled out the paperwork for other states.
Excellent.
So someone in Florida could take that class and get continuing education credit.
Great. That's super. Okay, thank you, Althea. I look forward to working with you on that. That sounds very exciting.
I think it will be really exciting. I was just at a conference last week by Zoom where people were talking, law students, new lawyers, some experienced lawyers, talking how they could get involved in animal law. And so one of the best ways to get involved in animal law is to help Joey's Legacy. And there's other ways that you can get involved in animal law, which I'll talk about later, if you want me to.
Cool. Very good. Thank you.
Dr. Cannizzaro, I have a question for you. What has your experience been in reviewing the cases for Joey's Legacy, as far as the percentage of cases actually revealing negligence or malpractice?
Excuse me, I swallowed my water a little the wrong way. So I apologize for that.
That's fine.
I would say, I would say less, probably approximately a little less than 50%. And it could be a number that might be closer to 50% if we had a situation where the medical records were more complete or really corroborated what the pet parent had to say. I know I sound like a broken record. As a homeopathic veterinarian, I always ask for the medical records, the doctor notes, having nothing to do with any legal cases or anything like that. That enables me to understand the pet's historical information, values, x-rays, anything that may have been done up until the point that the pet comes to see me. And I'm going to say that independent of Joey's Legacy, it's an extremely common thing to have medical records that are incredibly brief, not very detailed, And that has nothing to do with the complaints that pet parents have going through Joey's Legacy. So right there, we're already at a tremendous disadvantage, because on a good day, when there isn't necessarily any medical malpractice, even potential medical malpractice, I'm just asking for medical records so that I could better understand what's going on, because I didn't see that pet for the first 13 years of their life or 8 years of their life. So I really don't know what the veterinarians have seen over an 8-year period of time. So when I'm reviewing those records, it's astounding to me. Just the brevity. And then what I do is a homeopathic workup. So I'm asking the pet parent while they're with me the detailed historical information about their experience of their pet. And then I also ask questions about the veterinary visits as I am going through the records with the client. I ask them questions. It's amazing to me how many times people will say that, oh, well, that tumor was there. You mean it's not in the record? And no, it's not in the record. Oh, so the tumor was present at that time, 2 years prior, to when it was finally mentioned, or a heart murmur or whatever. So I say this so that you get a clear understanding of what kind of challenge we have with regard to records. And if the veterinary board always cites veterinarians for record keeping violation, is probably the easiest thing they will ever get a veterinarian on, because so many veterinarians are either too busy, too lazy. I don't really know what the answer is necessarily, be really thorough in their records. As a homeopathic veterinarian, I'm very thorough in my records, and I'm sure that I've missed a few things in my day as well as making mistakes, or maybe not feeling a mass that somebody else behind me feels, or something like that. I mean, things happen. Fortunately, none of those things have been life-threatening, and none of those things have been serious, but we all can miss a little bit of something. But it's astounding to me just how incomplete the records are on a day-to-day basis. So right there, we have an uphill battle. So again, I would encourage pet parents to make sure that they get absolutely everything, a copy of everything, all the lab results, treatment sheets if your pet's been hospitalized at that particular facility, radiographs, videos, if you have any videos of your pet. All of those things can be incredibly helpful, and they may be able to fill in the gaps and the pieces of information that corroborate what your experience has been with the veterinarian, so we can have a better idea, or be able to give a better idea. I'm happy to write a letter, and I would say that there's a much smaller percentage of letters that I have written that I think are really strong letters. I've written a couple of very strong letters where I really felt strongly that the veterinarian made some really astounding, critical mistakes that cost the pet their life. Then there are some other ones that are suggestive that the chain of events that occurred could have been or should have been handled better. And it's sort of an on the fence whether we should or shouldn't write a letter with regard to that. I can assure you, and I'm not an attorney, that an attorney is going to want the former letter that I just mentioned. And unfortunately, that maybe is 10 to 20% of the cases, and the rest of them are going to be somewhere between 20 to maybe 40, 45%, where those letters are, it looks like there's something here. I think there's something here, versus there's really something here that should not have taken place, period, is below the standard of care. There really was negligence. And I can think of 2 letters in particular that were, that strong on my behalf.
Dr. Cannizzaro, all of the vets that and we have our email thread that goes round and round, and most of the vets say that the number one problem that pet parents face is poor communication between the vet and themselves. And if that deficiency was ever corrected, a lot of these requests for reviews would not take place. Would you agree with that? Or do you have any comment on that?
I completely agree with that. The number one problem, and I think we've mentioned this in prior podcasts too, is communication. Sometimes a pet parent won't remember something the veterinarian said, or the veterinarian's in a hurry and they didn't happen to mention, a few key side effects or concerns or risks associated with a procedure, and it comes as a surprise. Veterinarians, as we go through time, and I speak for every one of us, whenever we're anesthetizing an animal, so many times, if you've been practicing a long time, and I certainly have, but I don't do surgery anymore, and we take for granted. I mean, anesthesia is an incredibly serious procedure, and any animal, any age, with apparently perfectly healthy, cannot survive anesthesia or survive anesthesia. And if you think about it, how many people have dropped their pet off for a neuter or a stay, and the veterinarian doesn't even discuss the complications or, that, yes, there's a possibility your pet could pass away from anesthesia. And more often than not, it's from anesthesia and not the procedure itself. I'm not saying that pets don't pass away from procedures, but a lot of times it's the anesthesia, whether there was poor monitoring or if the pets had an unusual reaction to anesthesia. There could be any myriad of reasons, and certainly malpractice could be one of them, but that would be hard to prove. Communication is critical, and when I was doing surgery, I always discussed whether this was a stay or a neuter or a more complicated surgery, the risks of anesthesia, because I felt it was incredibly important to be honest and to let people know that the unexpected can happen. Because that shock to make the phone call from you're expecting, or, there's no such thing as routine spay or neuter. So let us all absolutely get that out of our head, that there's no such thing as routine surgery. There's no surgery that is routine, period, at all, ever. And so if you're getting a procedure done, like a dental cleaning or spay or a neuter, and you haven't had any communication, I know this isn't the majority of our cases, but let's say that we've just taken it for granted and your pet passes away under anesthesia during one of those procedures, it wouldn't be unusual the veterinarian didn't discuss the possible risks in a pet, because most of those pets survive that procedure and it's not a big deal. And so why discuss it? If we had to do open heart surgery, they probably sit down and really talk to you about the risks. But for spay, neuter, dentals, maybe not. So I would agree with that statement. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a medical procedure, a surgical procedure, whenever the pet parent's expectation isn't met, or their pet comes back in a state that is completely surprising, unexpected, or God forbid, your pet doesn't even come home, or doesn't come home, but in a casket. That is an enormous shock. And at that point, if you're expecting the communication is going to then be made up at that time when the surprise has arrived, that is going to be a horrific time to try to mock poor communication, where the communication should have occurred at the very beginning, to walk that pet parent through that procedure. And I do this to this very day, even in my practice, even though I don't do surgery anymore. I do see a lot of really critical pets. They've been through a lot of medical procedures. They're very brittle. Their chances of survival might not be so great. When we discuss proceeding with treatment, versus euthanasia versus whatever else, I think it's critical. I try my very best to be very communicative about what we might expect. While none of us can guess precisely what we're going to get in the end, we should discuss all of the options and what our expectations are. And a lot of the cases in Joey's Legacy are pets that are discharged in no shape to be discharged, and with completely lacking communication to the pet parent about what they should watch for and what would constitute a potential medical emergency. And so some of those pets didn't need to die, even though they were discharged in too compromised a state and shouldn't have been discharged. They didn't need to die. And there's communication failures beginning, middle, and at the end of procedures. And we as veterinarians better get better at it. Otherwise, my esteemed I admire my attorney friend over here, is going to become very prominent and very active in veterinary malpractice. You'll be very, very busy with cases, because when it comes to going after veterinarians, you may not get money for your pet per se, as far as that, but you'll be, most of us veterinarians are insured. We have liability insurance, so the attorneys know where to go. So we need to get better at this. We need to have better communication, period.
Thank you, Dr. Cannizzaro. Appreciate that very much.
We had a follow-up question in the chat for Dr. Cannizzaro, and they were asking, is it better to try and get more than one letter, or is just the one good enough? You were talking about earlier cases.
I haven't had much communication with some of the other veterinarians that are involved with Joey's Legacy. I am presuming, and I think I've understood sort of through the grapevine, that what one of us discovers in review of the records and or writing a letter is probably similar to what the other veterinarians are going to find or do. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that's an across the board for sure thing, but I honestly think that you may be wasting your money to go through a series of veterinarians, especially if the veterinarian is determined that there really isn't cause. And understand that we don't do this to become popular. If anything, we just put a gigantic target right on our foreheads. So we're going to do the best we can for the pet parent. If there is something there, we're going to try to find it. Not because we want to crucify our colleagues, because of course we don't want to. But we do want to, at least I can speak for myself, that when I get a case, I want to do the best I can not to look at it in a superficial manner and say, there's nothing here, forget it. Let's just get rid of this one. Or, I don't like breeders anyway, so I don't really want to, I'm just going to, this case shouldn't go anywhere because this person's a breeder anyway. We're not like that. I mean, we don't look at things that way, or at least I can speak for myself. So we're not going to look at these situations superficially. Could we miss something? I suppose there's always that possibility, but I'm not sure that, as hard as all of us work, I think we would likely come to the same conclusion. And Scott may be able to speak to that. I don't think an attorney would be emboldened by multiple letters on the same records, but our attorney could certainly speak to that. But Scott may be able to speak to whether or not veterinarians will come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, most do. When someone is referred to one of our veterinarians and the response is not what they're looking for, even though it's based on years of education, experience, and training, and the person has none, they still disagree. So
Right.
They essentially say, they don't know what they're talking about. Have you got another vet? Yeah, we got lots of vets. Vet number 2 invariably says the same thing as vet number 1. 1 or 2 times let's try a third vet. Okay. Third vet says the same thing. Where does it end? When do you want to stop? Sometimes it's not what you thought it was. A lot of times I think it is. I think generally, companion animal parents have great instincts as far as, what may have happened. That many of them were there. They saw pretty much every step of the way. Some are not excluded from the exam room and are forced to sit in the car in the parking lot. So, and I was going to go to Althea with this, but I think Dr. Cannizzaro kind of addressed it at the end. Would a second vet letter confirming malpractice or negligence strengthen your case, or would one be enough?
Well, for your case, having one letter would be enough. If you want to go hire more vets to write the same thing, it's not really going to bring that much more to it. It depends on the facts of the case, though. So sometimes having an additional letter, but you don't need that. You have one vet who's given the opinion, And that should be sufficient to start there. If it looks like you need more or additional documentation, that's something that can be worked on later as this proceeds. And sometimes when we look at these situations, they're very well may have been something that shouldn't have happened in those situations. But whether it rises to the level under the law of malpractice is, there's certain things that have to be met to show legal malpractice or, veterinary malpractice from a legal standpoint. And there may have been things there, but there may not be the evidence available to enable you to proceed and win. And so that's something that people need to think about. It doesn't mean something bad didn't happen, or maybe there was something going on, but you can only work with the evidence that you have that can be presented. And so that's sometimes a limitation that people have to keep in mind. And, in terms of looking at the cases too, you look at, who are the parties and how that all works together too. So there's a lot of different factors that may determine eventually, like if you took a case to trial, what that would entail. But, there are certainly situations I've had in my legal career where, yes, I'm sure something happened here, but we're not able to prove it. And that's sometimes, maybe that's easier to understand or to kind of come to terms with, but it is very hard because sometimes, and, just like Scott, you said, sometimes there are situations there that we may not, the whole picture may not be evident, and there may be other issues going on that, maybe there was something else done or some kind of intervening factor, or why, this situation, the evaluating veterinarian didn't find that there was negligence or something. So, you can only work with what you have. And sometimes it may not be there. And it's just like when I take, I've done litigation for many, many years. In any case, when you take it to trial, you have to have the documentation to show that you can win on your case, win on your claim. And so sometimes it's just the way the situation is. I mean, I've handled discrimination cases, and sometimes we know something's going on, but we don't have any evidence to prove it. And unfortunately, in court, we have to have evidence, because if it's a jury looking at the case, they're going to look at, well, what does the evidence show? And sometimes you just may not have it, even though it's there, because sometimes things go missing, things get destroyed. Maybe there was no record or documents created. So there's just any number of reasons.
Thank you, Althea.
Okay, Althea, I have a question for you. You were talking about teaching animal law in college. Does
Yes.
that include the education on non-companion animals, or is that just companion animals?
So I've taught animal law at law school, at the law school level. So I was one of the first, when they started offering animal law courses, I was one of the early instructors. And so when the content of the course, it's really up to the professor teaching the course. But what I include is, we talk about just general concepts in law, starting from standing. So why, animals can't represent themselves in court. We can't sue on behalf of, I have my dachshund Jake. Jake cannot go to court and file a lawsuit for something that happened to him. So we have different ways of how we represent the interests of animals, and we talk about the historical context. And then we go cover, different situations, different animals. So there are, factory farming is included, marine animals are included. So it's beyond just companion animals, because it's all somewhat interrelated. There's some constitutional cases that we cover about animal sacrifice. There are just a variety of different cases on, what's considered animal cruelty or animal abuse. So it's very interesting when you teach a course that takes information from all of the states, you can see that some states are better than others in terms of animal advocacy and animal rights. And so, but it covers everything. It's more than just companion animals, but the arguments for some areas of law can be brought into companion animals and taken from there. And it's just interesting when you look at the cases as a whole, what's considered animal cruelty in one situation, even in the same case, may be different in another situation. And some states are more favorable towards animal advocacy than others. And surprisingly, the states you wouldn't think would be are. So
Do you think that there's a genuine curiosity on the part of the law students about veterinary malpractice, or is it simply just a brand new concept for them?
veterinary malpractice may be covered. It's probably not covered in their classes unless they take an animal law class, because veterinary malpractice is typically covered in an animal law course, depending again on what the instructor wants. But I think this area of veterinary malpractice is something that kind of, it covers two areas. You are able to represent the interests of animals, and you're also working in a litigation standpoint. So a lot of the people that end up going into maybe personal injury cases or advocating for plaintiffs, so they're interested in plaintiffs' rights, in the victims, not the corporations or the insurance companies, may find this area very close to the other areas of law they practice in. And I think if they just knew about it, we would get more people into that, because people who want to do litigation and go into trial advocacy, or who want to represent people rather than companies, would be drawn to this. And it would enable them to support their love and desire to help animals in a way that would be relatively easy for them to do and to include in their practice.
Okay, and we got a question in the chat. It's a two-part. In cases where the pet is harmed or killed, as I believe was the case with my pet, by one of those corporately owned hospitals, is legal representation different? And then compared to traditional animal hospitals, the corporate hospitals can often be more aggressive in their legal tactics when accused of wrongdoing. In these cases, do you have any tips for the pet parent?
Don't
So-
go to one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't go
that's
to
the good
corporate
advice.
vets. Sorry.
No, and you know, a lot of it is going to be because they carry insurance, who the insurance carrier is. And sometimes I know with, 20, 30 years ago, insurance carriers decided that they were going to take every small personal injury case to trial. And so that was like a concerted effort by those automobile insurance carriers to do that. And so that changed how those cases were handled. And a lot of people ended up, attorneys ended up not representing plaintiffs in small car accident cases. So the response may be just to, the corporate entities may have more money, they may have more resources, but the bottom line is if they can look at, they're going to look at it from a cost benefit analysis, and how much money is this costing us and how much would it cost to resolve? And while we want to see them take responsibility, it's really going to come down to those corporate entities as a dollar value. And that's offensive to many people, but that's what they're looking at. Usually by the time the insurance carrier is handling the case, whether it's a corporate entity or an individual vet, there's not a lot. I don't know, doctor, if you want to clarify that. Usually they kind of handle it the way they handle it, and there's usually not a lot of say that the insured has into what's going on. I mean, there's certain areas that they can comment on depending on the policy and so forth, but it just really is a matter of looking at, then that's why when lawyers decide to take on cases, they look at how strong is the case, because if you're going to fight with all your resources on a case where that may be questionable as to whether negligence occurred or the issues are kind of not totally concrete. It's going to be a much harder fight, and it may end up that you don't win anything. So that's what lawyers are looking at. They're looking at how successful will this case be? What is the evidence to support the claims? What is the likelihood of winning? Because you don't, as a lawyer, want to take your clients through, if you end up going into litigation, going to court, and then have it not be a good outcome, because it's very emotionally draining and upsetting and expensive in more ways than just money. So that's something lawyers should talk to their clients about too. But you just have to get everything in order, find all the evidence, get your documents in place, be very well organized, and don't worry that they're a big entity. They have, lawyers, and keeping in mind at some place it's going to be a cost benefit analysis on their end, but technology has leveled the playing field for many people. If you would have asked this question, 40 years ago, it would be a different answer. But now sole practitioners can compete against the largest law firms because technology has leveled the playing field. And I think that enables plaintiffs to get better representation and stronger representation. And the resources the large law firms have are resources that even the sole practitioner can have.
Dr. Cannizzaro, did you have a comment about that?
I'd like to say that that the insurance companies do reach out to the veterinarian, and they will actually ask the veterinarian if they want to settle. And if the veterinarian says, no, I didn't do anything wrong, I don't want to settle this, then the insurance company will proceed along. For the most part, the insurance company does pretty much everything. But if there's a decision to be made about a settlement, now, if the veterinarian has grossly been negligent, and I don't know all the ins and outs and details of that, if it's really obvious, I would imagine that the attorneys with the insurance company would probably encourage the veterinarian to go ahead and settle. But I think that the ultimate decision does lie with the veterinarian. But I haven't been in all situations. So I have been in a situation where my liability insurance did kick in, and the insurance company did ask me, did I want to settle? And I said, no, I didn't do anything wrong. And then, it ended up being dismissed anyway, or we won actually. We actually won. But then that did go all the way to court. So it was a sad thing for the client. But I wasn't in the position of harming their pet. Actually, the subsequent vet did. But it was turned on me instead as a homeopathic veterinarian. And it was a precedent-setting case because it was an argument about the use of antibiotics versus not using antibiotics. And she came to me because she didn't want to use antibiotics. And I used homeopathic medicine and her dog improved. But then when she went to a specialist, the specialist prescribed a bunch of medications and the dog did really, really poorly. And the dog didn't pass away, fortunately, but the internal medicine specialist said how horrible it was that I had treated the dog. So she decided to go after me. So the insurance, so I've had limited experience with the liability insurance, but they did come to me and say, they weren't pushy about it, but they said, would you want to settle this? And I said, well, I didn't do anything wrong. And they said, no problem, we're going to defend it as long as you want us to defend it. And I said, okay, that's fine. So we did. And anyway, so it did turn out in my favor. So, but
Thank
anyway,
you, Doc. Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go
So
ahead.
I hope that helps.
Great. Thank you. It does. Okay.
Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have tonight. I really appreciate you being here, Althea and Dr. Cannizzaro. And I promise in 2 weeks, I won't stumble over my words.
You're fine. No worries.
No worries.
But
And thank you, Scott, for all the hard work that you do and
You're
all
welcome.
the advocacy. We're here for the pets. We're here for pet
Absolutely.
parents.
We love our vets. We love our attorneys and our grief counselors and everyone that pitches in to make Joey's Legacy the success that it's become over the last 5 years. And we're looking forward to great things this year. working with Althea on this new idea, which I hope will just explode throughout the country. And,
Be nice.
yeah,
I
Well,
would take that
maybe
class.
Althea would entertain an idea. I know you mentioned a little bit about getting veterinarians involved in the discussion. And anyway, I think that would be a wonderful thing also to find out how we might be able to promote, even in the veterinary field, better communication. And lastly, want to say too that please, everyone, be careful with the curbside thing. If we thought communication was a stumbling and a terrible deal right now or before COVID, curbside has made it exponentially worse. So make sure that you're super clear and make sure that you are your pet's advocate, because no one else will be. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if the veterinarian is too short, too rude, doesn't answer your question sufficiently enough, please go elsewhere. There is always time to go. I shouldn't say always, almost always time to go elsewhere. So please select wisely and be your pet's advocate. It's so critical.
thank you,
And
Doctor.
I hope I get a chance to talk to you again sometime soon as well.
Thank you so much. And it's really great that Joey's Legacy has really created this resource where there wasn't anything before. And I think as it continues to go forward, things will gain momentum and the resources available will really be a tremendous help to people and to animals.
Thanks to you both. Ailis, thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Ailis.
we'll see you in 2 weeks. And anyone have any issues, give us a call. We're here to help. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you.